The failure to act with sufficient ambition to avert the climate catastrophe will be the greatest moral failure of our time.
Making changes takes courage, and if we don't change things, we won't have a future.
I'm an environmentalist. A lot of people don't understand that. I think I know more about the environment than most people.
You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. Change is coming, whether you like it or not.
Zero Carbon
East Talk. Hello and welcome to Zero Carbonista Series 2, The Manifesto. I'm Ian Collins. It's a brand new year and one big resolution from us to continue bringing you the biggest stories on the green agenda. We might just be a mere week into 2021, but the inbox is piling up with environmental stories in need of exposure. Dale Vince, of course, as you know, is our man in the driving seat on all of this. Morning to you, Dale.
Yeah, morning, Ian, and Happy New Year and all that.
Yeah, and you too. Did you do the rave? You know, invite several friends around and, you know, the mother of all blowouts on New Year's Eve?
Actually, I stayed up past midnight for the first time in a very long time.
Did you?
Yeah,
I've not done that.
My son Rui was like super keen to do it, so I did it with him.
Yeah, I think sometimes, you know, when you're that age, you're sort of expecting something to happen at midnight. I don't know whether there's a sort of sense, you know, will you experience something?
Yeah. And you know, I think actually a bunch of adults were as well, weren't they? I mean, I saw quite a lot of commentary around the idea that thank God 2020 was over and we could start a new year. And I was thinking, well, look, nothing's changed in one day. Do you know what I mean?
No, true.
We're going to wake up in the same world.
Yeah.
But there we have it.
And we continue in a lockdown, of course. But these stories, as I mentioned at the beginning, they don't go away, and rightly so. They shouldn't go away. I was just intrigued to start. We'll come to Veganuary in a second because that's looks as if that's incredibly successful. I want to talk about this business of plants having feelings because it's not an entirely new subject, but there is, it seems, maybe some new research around this.
Yeah, I was reading that this morning. Sentience, in particular, was the subject of the research using some French beans. I don't know why they couldn't use English beans, for God's sake. You know, we're not part of Europe anymore. But anyway.
That's what went wrong.
That'd be what it is. French beans are just smarter. And they tried to kind of, they set up a series of experiments that was similar to mimicking sticking a blindfolded human into a room and not telling them there was an object there. So in the case of a bean, it was a pole, and the pole was either near them or not near them, and they observed the behavior of the bean in both cases, and it was different, leading them to believe that the bean knew what it was doing or knows what it's doing. Other scientists say that's not quite how they interpret it and all of that stuff, but it's a very interesting story.
Have you ever kind of gone down that route of, you know, you do hear some real evangelists talk about plants and feelings. But of course, they don't have a central nervous system, so that you'd think that would be enough to kind of ward off that particular allegation. But there's a small contingent of people that feel quite strongly about that. I mean, how would we eat?
Yeah, well, there's an issue, and you know, I've heard this before from kind of what you might describe as rabid meat-eating types that they're absolutely angry with the whole vegan and plant-based agenda. And you know, the classic comeback is plants have feelings too, and you're murdering plants, and it's like, oh wow, my God, you know, I mean, there is a world of difference, of course, between mammals and plants in terms of biology and physiology and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, for me, it would be a scary thought to think that plants had any kind of self-awareness and you know, any of the attributes that intelligent life has. I mean,
I don't want to be dismissive of the wonderful world of plants and fruit and veg, but I mean, have you looked at a parsnip? I mean, that's not making any decisions anytime soon, is it?
Well, there is that. There is that.
I say without any kind of agricultural qualification.
Yeah. I think it's fair.
Yeah. But let's stick with a food-based theme because a record 500,000 people have signed up for Veganuary. The challenge, of course, to eat only plant-based foods for a month. And the theory, of course, is enough people, you know, sign up to it, and the legacy is that many of those people carry it on.
Yeah, and I think 3 years ago it was 150,000 people. So, you know, it's grown in popularity. It's become a global thing, which is fantastic. And off the back of that, supermarkets are pumping out an increasing number of vegan and vegetarian lines. I mean, it's like they're competing with each other now. Tesco, Sainsbury's, Ocado, you know, all those people, Stock and Co-op as well, increasing amounts of stuff. which is fantastic. And fast food outlets, of course, like Greg's, even McDonald's have got a plant-based burger. I mean, I think plant-based food is taking over, and it's something that more and more people are concerned about because they become aware of it. And I think we have the internet to thank for that. And it's about human health primarily for most people, and the climate crisis. And I think, for some people, people choose their own reasons, but the three are human health, climate, and animal rights. And some people prefer one to the other. I embrace all three. All three of them bother me. But I think this is the way the world is moving, and there are people that don't like it. There's a story in the press this week from the beef farming lobby. They've commissioned a report that says UK's beef herds could be the key to sustainable farming. We just need to stop eating, guess what, pigs and chickens, but we can carry on eating beef. This is from the beef lobby. I love that because what I see here, Ian, is the meat industry fighting amongst itself now for market share. We've got the cow farmers saying, "Look, just stop eating chickens and pigs. Cows are okay." I love that.
I have no qualification in the world of auditing, but I think I've spotted the conflict of interest in their point there.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. And what can I say? Meanwhile,
cows are just fine. Don't touch the chickens. The cows, though, they're all good.
But when we reach the point where they're fighting amongst themselves and attacking each other, then we've reached a really important milestone in the whole argument about not eating meat. Meanwhile, there have been a couple of stories around disease and animal farming. So there's a deadly pig virus that's just blown up in Germany that looks like it's threatening the industry there. And bird flu, of course, has become a thing and is now threatening the duck industry in France. Of course, it's all European business, nothing to do with us. But it's happening, and it's symptomatic of intensive factory farming. It's just a sick business.
Here's a point from Alex on Twitter, who says, after this week's shame, is it time to stop giving Trump oxygen in the intro to this podcast? That's a fair point, I think, and I understand from the technical team behind this podcast, Dale, that he's due to be impeached from the intro on the day that he leaves office.
Well, that was my instinct when I read the comment. I thought, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't give him oxygen. But then when you put the words shame and oxygen together, I thought to myself, do you know what? We should keep giving oxygen to his shame, actually. This is a man who's going to be dumped from the biggest job on the planet in absolute disgrace. And I quite like the fact that it's happened. And some of the stuff that he's done and said, is going down in history. There's no doubt about it. So I'm a bit kind of ambivalent on that. Let's have a chat afterwards, see if we leave him in a little bit longer. He's not gone yet, obviously. He's got 20 days left.
Although there's a suggestion that he could be kicked out today.
Impeached in the real world.
In the real world, because there is this 25th Amendment thing which would allow that to happen. But it means quite a lot of moving parts need to all come together at the same time. And I think a lot of those people are busy elsewhere. So they might just say, go on, have your extra 20 days or whatever it is.
I think it needs Mike Pence to find his moving parts because he's the man with the finger on the trigger, but he won't do that. So that leaves Congress with impeachment, which won't remove him immediately, but they actually have the power to prevent him from ever holding public office again. And I think they should use that because otherwise this man hasn't gone away.
I said to somebody this week, who would the Republicans get to replace? Or is the person they would rally around with a view to being their next leader? The person that would challenge at the 2024 election. And they said Mike Pence. And I thought, are you for real? And I mean, Mike Pence, when you haven't got to dig too deep onto the character of Mike Pence to see there's an absolute dysfunctional arse clown there as well.
Well, actually, I think he's got all the charisma of that parsnip you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, well, right. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned, Mitt Romney. I mentioned to this guy, I said, what about Mitt Romney? Because if you want somebody who's going to kind of look the part, Mitt Romney's straight out of Central Casting, this fella, and by all accounts, quite a decent bloke. And he's had a go once before and didn't make it happen, but, seems like a reasonable fella on that side of the political spectrum. And he said, oh, no, Pence will be much better than Romney. And I think this is where often, all parties get it wrong, whether it's left or right, but I think the right get it spectacularly wrong. And the greatest example, of course, was the Conservatives putting Ian Duncan Smith in as their leader a few years ago. And somebody thought that might work because they quite liked what he stood for, but they didn't realise that in order to execute or sell his ideology, you've got to have some verve about you. And, he's about as alive as a house brick when it comes to public speaking. So, and I think Pence is kind of in that category, that maybe they'll make that error.
Well, these things are like football games, aren't they? Where you've got two teams on the pitch, and in the era of this guy, the Tories were standing up new leaders only for Tony Blair to knock them down one after the other. And their real problem was not that they had a leader that was rubbish, was that Labour had a great leader. And they've got a leader that's rubbish now, but it's okay because he won the election because of who he was facing. And I like Jeremy, but the electorate didn't. And before that, Cameron. So it's like a game of football. Yeah. When you judge a game of football, you've got to always bear in mind that there are two teams on the pitch. You could look at your team and say, we were fantastic, but you've got to think, well, were the other team rubbish, or was it a mixture of both,
Here's some big news for Ecotricity. Geothermal power. What's this about, Dale?
Oh, yeah. Electricity made from an underground source of renewable energy, which I really quite like because, we're quite used to fossil fuels being dug up from the ground. But renewable energy tends to be above ground, the wind and the sun primarily. Geothermal's been around for a long time, of course. I think Iceland is virtually completely powered by geothermal due to its unique geology, but it hasn't happened in Britain before. Some guys have drilled about 3 miles deep in Cornwall and tapped into some water hot enough to make energy. And I think within about 12 months, the first project will be producing power for about 10,000 homes a year. And we've signed a PPA to make that happen. And they're looking at some other sites. And I think geothermal has got potentially a great role to play. The absolute key is the cost of drilling. And then it could work in other parts of the UK as well. But the bit that I love the best is the idea to take an old power station like a gas or a coal-fired power station and to drill and turn it into a geothermal power station, because all of the other assets that you need are there. You've got the grid, you've got the turbines, you've got the transformers and all that kind of stuff. You just need to give it a different source of heat. So instead of burning fossil fuels, give it some underground heat. And I think it's a marvelous idea because we've got the sites, we've got to close them down, stop burning stuff, and we could repurpose them and we could produce baseload renewable energy at these old power stations.
Yeah, I hear you, Dale, but I have to say you're completely wrong on this. And I'll tell you why you're wrong, because Robert Jenrick knows better. He, of course, is the community secretary, but environmental campaigners are not happy with him because he's kind of not blocked a new coal mine. I mean, when you see the headline, coal mine, you think, oh, this is an old newspaper cutting from the 80s.
Thatcher's back.
Yeah, I mean, you just kind of assume that kind of stuff has gone or at least phased out. Not reopening or starting a new one. What's going on here?
Actually, it's a good point. Thatcher closed them down, didn't she? She wasn't a fan of coal. But I tell you what's going on here. I mean, it does sound on the face of it all kinds of wrong and anti the climate agenda and that kind of stuff. But the coal that they're planning to dig out from under the sea, in fact, the land-based mine is going to extend out under the sea, is for coking, for making steel. And I don't know if there is a renewable alternative to that. I haven't looked into it, but it's not for making energy.
No, they're not going to be putting this on your fire, but it's not a good look, is it?
Well, no. But I think it's a serious issue that needs to be looked at. Do we need to use fossil fuels like this in industrial processes to make materials? Do we not have a renewable alternative? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think Robert Jenrick knows either, but, there it is. He probably met somebody at a Tory dinner who said, look, this is a great idea. And that was it.
Yeah. Have a look at this, Bob. And off it was signed, which so often seems to be the case. This came from Martin Deadman. This is cracking stuff. Loved hearing you mention Forest Green's bar is the Green Man. Like you, hope you don't mind. I made a new pub sign for you. And he sent this through to us, and we've both seen it, Dale, and this looks pretty darn good.
Yeah. And in the couple of days since we've had it, we've turned it round, and it's being made for us now. We're putting up a new sign on the Green Man pub at Forest Green using the image. Thanks very much for that. We really like it, and so we're going to use it. And thanks for.
Does Martin know yet?
Yes, he does. Yes,
that his great artwork is going to be.
Yes, because we asked him first for permission.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, you don't want a big old invoice. We did find out he works for Saatchi and Saatchi. £3 million for that, thank you. This this comes from Dan on Twitter. Dale, what are your predictions for 2021 for both the Planet and Forest Green rovers? Big question. I don't know which one's biggest of those two.
Yeah, I'm going to take Forest Green first. I think we're in with a real shout of promotion to League One at the end of this season, which obviously lands almost halfway through 2021. And we should get started on our training ground at Junction 13, not quite yet on the stadium, but we'll take more steps in that direction. And, so we'll be a League One club building our own training ground. So these would be big steps for Forest Green. For the environment, it's a job to know. We've got COP26 being held here by our government. So, I mean, that's a shame to put those two things in the same sentence. COP26, could be good for the world, but it's being run by our government. So, maybe not. But we'll see what we can do on the campaign front around that. But there's, some great hope in the news this week around the climate crisis. A new study, some new modeling shows that if we do get to net zero, when we get to net zero, we can avoid runaway climate change. And, there is hope. We can reduce carbon in the atmosphere over time and reduce or control the temperature rise. So I only read that this week, and it's a brilliant piece of modelling that shows that it's not all over. Actually, on the climate front, we have every opportunity to turn this round. So I like that. Let's hope COP26 achieves something.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing. What I find fascinating about the kind of position of Boris Johnson, I know if we had a government minister sitting here, they would reel off all of their green credentials and how it's an improvement on previous governments, how they've exceeded targets here. There's always a kind of a spin on it. But I mean, in order, for example, to appease what you would like to see, or even partly appease, I mean, there's no loss for them, is there? There's no loss for them to do it. I mean, there might be a few right-wingers who are a bit pissed off that they've gone down the green, but they're not going to lose their vote. They would only stand to gain respect from people like yourself and other people of a different part of the political spectrum.
Yeah, I think that's what David Cameron thought when he campaigned when he ran his first election. He said he was going to run the greenest government ever, and I think he had exactly that same thought in mind. But what the reality he found was his party rejected that, and although it was popular in the country, it wasn't popular in the Tory party. I don't know if that has changed. But you'd think it would be an easy decision to make. Last week, when we finally left the EU, there was a story about the tampon tax, VAT, on sanitary products, and how the government kind of basically were deceitful in claiming that now we're out of the EU, we could finally deal with that, when in fact the EU were dealing with it anyway. But push that slightly to one side. And linked to that, you've got this long outstanding grievance that many people in the renewable industry have, that if you want to put solar panels on your home, you pay 20% VAT. If you want to burn coal to power your home, you pay 5%. So I think, the government have this great opportunity for a Brexit dividend in the green arena. Let's take VAT off of solar panels, off of energy efficient products, off of electric cars. They don't need to bung grants to people to buy electric cars. Just stop taking tax from them to buy electric cars. There's a huge opportunity here. We're going to launch a campaign probably in the next week or so based around that. And it kind of links into the Book, of course, manifesto, Cue the Bugle, which really sets out how government policies on taxes and subsidies and regulations is the key to getting to zero carbon.
Couple of other questions here. Caroline says, this feeds into something we spoke about a second ago. You spent years telling us that fracking was bad, and now you're backing geothermal power. I mean, I wasn't going to mention that, Dale, but I did wonder how there must be distinctions here, or there must be a way that you're satisfied with technology in this respect, because you can see why people would make the argument that Caroline has put forward.
Well, I can and I can't, actually, because if you look at the practice of fracking, it involves pumping a toxic liquid underground at huge pressure and destroying vast areas of rock. And if you look at the practice of geothermal, it involves drilling.
It's just a massive Black and Decker, isn't it? Really,
it's one long, relatively narrow hole. You could say one is like keyhole surgery, and the other one is like a slaughterhouse. Complete destruction of a body compared to making a small hole in it.
Yeah, good analogy.
So I think, of course, it has an impact on the ground, but it's nothing like the disaster of fracking. There's a world of difference.
And here's one from George. Have I won a Sky Diamond yet? In fact, on that point, I just heard the Book Bugle So just explain for those new to this, they've just listened to this podcast for the very first time, Dale. What is the Sky Diamond? What is the book?
Well, the Sky Diamond is something we launched, I think it was last November. May have been October. It all blurred a little bit. Something new that we've done, which is we've created a process to make diamonds from atmospheric carbon. So we can take carbon dioxide out of the air and turn it into a diamond, the most permanent form of carbon known to mankind. We're very excited with the whole concept, and the whole process is carbon negative. And, we put cleaner air back into the atmosphere than we take out. So it's an industrial first in that respect. And so we're excited by that. We tied it into the book and ran a Willy Wonka style competition. Anyone buying a book up until the 31st of December last year qualified for the draw. We're going to give away 10 diamond tickets, which will enable people to come and see the factory, meet with me, have a tour, and walk away with the very own Sky Diamond. And the draw for that is on the 13th of January. I think it's live online, actually.
Fantastic. Wednesday, 13th, live on your Facebook page. And Dale, have a cracking week. We'll speak next Friday.
Yeah, I got one for you, actually. I got a question. I got a question for you. It's Ian. What's the what does talk radio and Donald Trump got in common?
Go on.
You've both been banned from social media.
Yeah, I know. Talk radios did come back quite fast. I think the YouTube boys had to lob their tail between their legs a little bit and go, I think we might have overreacted. Even by our standard, we might have overreacted. It's extraordinary, isn't it, that YouTube have taken the Trump stuff off, but allowed the Chinese embassy to talk about how brilliant their human rights are against many of the people they're accused of actually abusing. But that's apparently stayed up there for some reason.
Is it? They're brilliant. Yeah, I'm sure it was all down to Mike Graham anyway. The talk radio problem.
I think
our
it
good
was.
Friend. Yeah,
I think that's exactly what it was. Definitely will blame him. We'll speak next week, Dale.
Yeah, choose in.
That's it for this episode. Don't forget, of course, to subscribe for free from your podcast provider so that you get each new episode automatically. Do leave a review there as well. If you want to get in touch, zerocarbonista@ecotricity.co.uk is a rather easy way, or via social media. And on that point, do make sure you follow Dale, twitter.com/DaleVince or facebook.com/DaleVince. And we'll be back in 1 week.
Zero carbon
east of